But yeah, the first speaker is Domen Kožar, talking about GitHub Actions. So take the stage. Thank you.
Hey everyone, it's good to be back at NixCon. Yeah, I want to talk about CI, which has been something I've built in the past a few times, and a bit of my passion. I don't know, who remembers Travis CI? Woohoo! Oh, about half of the room. This was one of my favorite moments. Travis CI was the first CI that came out that kind of offered open source as a hosted service. And I remember I was with Nate in SysLab in Germany. It's a company, and we're jumping around very happily that this changes everything in open source. And it did, right? CI has become basically the norm that every open source project has. That has not been the case in 2011. And it came out with this idea of like, okay, we're gonna preset things for you, you just declare the language that you're using, a bit of configuration, and we're just gonna handle things for you. And that was really simple and really powerful at the time. So you can declare your language, you can create a bit of configuration, in this case different versions, and then kind of what do you want to test? And then GitHub Actions came out in 2018. And GitHub Actions had this benefit of having all the repositories already on GitHub, so they kind of invented a tiny bit more explicit configuration syntax that if you look, let's go through it. So the first thing they kind of said, okay, let's trigger these workflows based on some kind of events, right? Typically that would be push or on pull requests. And then they kind of okay, let's bundle the idea of what platform we are running on and also what OS we are running on into one thing and call it, this is the runner that we are going to execute this on. All right, we also do, same as Travis CI, we support some kind of matrix, but it's more generalized, so you can kind of iterate over a list or whatever and kind of have that as a variable. And then they introduced reusability, which is referencing repos around the GitHub as a way to execute code. So you can see two very different approaches. Travis picked oh, let's just create a convention for let's run this thing and we're gonna maintain that, and GitHub Actions kind of shifted that and said, okay, let's do that, whatever people have in a repo, and being able to reference that across the whole ecosystem of GitHub. I think both of these have advantages and disadvantages. We're going to talk about that later. And I feel a bit of a shame what Travis brought is not part of GitHub Actions. So we'll talk about that a bit later. So first I want to go a bit into a more complex example, how that looks like. So as I said, there's events, there's the runner. We check out some source. You're probably all familiar with this, so I'm just going to speed run through this. Then we set up, in this case, Python, and we can iterate through a matrix, so we can kind of have different jobs, set up different Pythons for us. Then we install some requirements, some dependencies with Python. We can link the thing, and then we can run some tests. That's a pretty standard open source project. Maybe outdated example, because I'm using this Travis example as a base, but you get the idea. But there's a couple of issues that are actually I live in Lanzarote, and there was a product manager from GitLab by chance, just passing by, and I talked to him. Hey, how is the CI going, and how is everything? And he said, well, the top request for GitHub and GitLab is that you cannot run things locally the same way as you run on CI, and that has always been the case that people were asking for that. So that's number one complaint. The second one is, like, GitHub introduced YAML as a language, which many projects do, but we all know this has a lot of limitations. I think they did a pretty good job, to be honest, but it comes with all kinds of limitations. And it has like these pre-baked OS ideas. So like you get like an Ubuntu, and if you want to run on a different version of Ubuntu, then you need to upgrade, things break, and so on. There's a bunch of them, but these are, I would say, the major ones. So if you really look at this example, what we're doing is something that's very familiar with us. For us, using Nix, we're constructing a developer environment. So then the question becomes, what is the difference between developer environment and CI? If you look at this example here, there's not that much of a difference, right? Probably most of us have set up GitHub Actions like install Nix, run Nix. That's it. There's not much more than that. So yeah, the Nix kind of flips that script, and at least my CI jobs don't really configure much more beyond that. All right, so now we're going to do like a 180 turn and talk a little bit about from the other side of Nix. We've been doing a lot of developer experience thinking of like how do we simplify Nix, how do we make things easier, especially for beginners. And I think that that is super important. There's like a huge group of people here who have been doing Nix for like 10 years, some maybe 5, and we kind of have these blind spots, right? We have like crawled through the ecosystem and learned a lot of things, and we kind of forget that each of these learnings on the way had to be like hours of research or making decisions and so on. So there's a lot of things to developer experience, but the major one is cognitive load, right? You want to, let's say my task is to create a CI job. Like now I need to decide on, let's say, how do I set up my Python, right? And if there's a lot of options, I need to pick between those options. That's a decision I need to make. But if I'm a beginner, I don't care about those options. I just want to have Python running, right? I'm not opinionated at all at that stage to make that decision. And I'm probably just going to trust somebody, right? I'm going to search for a blog post or something to figure out that. There was this tweet by Jason in May, which I found really cool. And by the way, this is not too bad that there is a lot of options, right? I think it's great that people out there go and they build a lot of different types of projects when it's an experiment, and then like abandon that idea and say, hey, there's another thing. But for a beginner, it's pretty much like this, right? This is what it's all about. It's like thousands of options, half of them are deprecated. What the hell do I use? So it's a bit of like analysis paralysis. So I think ideally, right, we would have kind of like 2 options. We would have something like languages Python enable, and you're the boss. You tell me what that should do. And then there's like the low-level interface, which is like, okay, now I want to like do it my way, and I want to pick the tools. And this is called in convention over configuration. It's a pretty known concept where we let like conventions take place, and then configuration kind of override possible options. So we've been working on Domen for about 3 years now. With a lot of these ideas in mind, and this could be a talk of its own about like flakes, the pros and cons of flakes, but we've learned that we had to reinvent the interface for how we interact with Nix in order to be appealing to newcomers, in order to be appealing to Nix developers that are not maybe so enthusiastic about Nix. And this is mostly because we've heard that teams do abandon Nix because somebody is not excited about Nix on the team, and that creates friction in the team, because now you have like this, hundreds of lines of let's say, a flake, and then maybe one person wants to maintain that, maybe two. Maybe that person leaves the team. Now, who maintains the flake? Who maintains all that configuration? So the idea is, okay, how do we boil down all of this complexity to something that is super simple to explain to people? Especially now, with some of you might use AI these days, some of you not. We can like not really know Nix language and ask AI to kind of code up something for us, so we don't have to know the syntax. I think that barrier AI at least has removed quite a bit. But we still have to write all that code and understand it at the end of the day. So the idea is that, well, we have already NixOS, we have a lot of Nix Darwin, so let's use kind of like the same module system to express developer environments. All right, so if you look at this example, this is exactly what the GitHub Actions did, right? We set up Python specific version, we set up some dependencies, we kind of explain, oh, we're gonna test this thing with PyTest, and well, in this case, we extended a bit, and we say we're gonna use Git hooks in order to lint our project. So that's like quite a bit more declarative interface than what we have seen before. And the beauty of this is, like, this is our developer environment, but it's also CI. There is essentially no difference between the two. And I think that's like the ideal case, right? If you think about it, CI usually would run a few things slightly differently, but it's still constructing a developer environment for us. So one of the first tools we wanted to eliminate was Docker Compose. And with devenv and Nix, you can kind of declare processes and then say devenv up, and it brings you up those processes. That is essentially what Docker Compose intended to do, but it's not using any of the containers, so we just have processes running on our machine. And there is an abstraction of services where you can kind of like package a process and kind of expose options for that. That is essentially what Docker Compose does, brings together a few things. The only thing we're missing to Docker Compose, okay, you can pull in Docker image. In our case, we have inputs, so you can say, oh, let's reference this input and let's plug it in, let's plug in remote repo, and we can, in that way, compose polyrepos across each other. All right, so bringing it all together, now I can show you an example where there is difference between developer environment and CI. So in this case, we're constructing a developer environment with Python, the same thing as we did before, but we're saying, okay, how about like on the CI, I don't want to run Postgres, and locally I do. And something that is very often requested is monorepo support. So Git hooks by default will run on CI across the whole repo. And if you have like a huge project, most companies, that's going to take a really long time. So if we expose some kind of configuration that this is running now on a CI, let's say this job was triggered by GitHub, we can expose some metadata just the same way as we would do normally in devenv with options. We can then like say, okay, these are things that are exposed that when things run on CI will have value. And we can say, well, run the Git hooks between these two Git revisions, so not across the whole monorepo. And that makes CI fast suddenly. So this way we can kind of like tweak it, but it only applies to when it's run remotely. So yes, there will be a slight difference between developer environment and what runs on CI, but that is declaratively specified and pretty clear. So we're kind of mixing the two into one configuration. So now I'm going to go through a few, I would say, basic features of GitHub Actions. It's not, we cannot really go through all of them, but at least we can try to go through a few and see how that maps. Excuse me. So one of the pet peeves of mine with GitHub Actions is it's like really hard to run things in parallel. Like usually you kind of go through different steps, but all of these steps run sequentially, and you have to like really wiggle your way through making them parallel. So in Domen, we've developed a concept of tasks. You can think of tasks essentially Nix, but impure. So this is not running Nix, but it's still a DAG, right? It's still a dependency tree that executes. And it's pretty simple. Like you declare a task name and you declare what it's going to run, and then with before or after you can kind of declare what runs before one or another thing. So if you have things that should run in parallel, it will. But if things depend on each other, it's going to wait for it. And the beauty of this is like this works again on your local machine or on the CI. You can define tasks that are CI specific. All right. You can define a task that are like that are CI specific. You can declare tasks that are local or both. Again, by using like conditionals. So let's say you run a job on CI. Maybe some extra task will fire off. Maybe locally, the other way around. Oh yeah, and then there's like dev tests, which will execute the enter test hook that we've seen before. The nice thing about this, it will spawn processes, it's going to run the test, and then it's going to tear down the processes. So like, imagine you have a typical application. That's going to mean if you want to run like, let's say, some browser tests, some functional tasks, like all of that is kind of wired up for you. You just run, for example, Playwright or Selenium or whatever functional test you have. And dev test is going to take care of that. So set up the developer environment, include the processes, run the tests, and then tear down the whole thing. Runs the same on CI, runs the same on your local machine. All right. A few more examples. So this is something we haven't implemented it because we're still looking for we're still experimenting with design. But as I've mentioned before, like GitHub Actions has the limitation of YAML as a language, as we might call it. And it works pretty well for simple cases like this. Oh, I want to like generate different CI jobs based on Python version. But if we have a real language, we have way more power. How do we generate that? So I don't know if you're familiar with NixCon specializations, I think it's called. This is kind of like similar idea, but for developer environments. So the idea is you can define these kind of profiles that kind of like augment the basic developer environment. So if you see here, this will Python version 3.14, this profile will take the base config, but then override some options and kind of expose that. So you can clearly imagine that here we could use like a built-in map or something to kind of iterate through different versions and generate different profiles. And now we have the power of Nix language to kind of generate as many profiles as we want, and then we can ask CI, okay, just run through all these profiles and create different jobs for them and kind of like test this out. So there's like an issue about this, and yeah, still it's not implemented at all. Just to be clear, it's an idea exploration. So I'm curious if people have some ideas about this. I think supporting this kind of like slight modifications of developer environment based on some inputs is really cool idea and something that GitHub Actions support and also should developer environments. And then like locally you would be able to pass in a profile flag. We have actually a guide that kind of talks how to implement this without as a first-class citizen of Dev. You can pass like on command line options. You can say like declare a profile, an NixOS option, and then pass it through. But I would like to make this a first-class feature. So yet to be done. Another one. This is not exactly not the same, but I think that a lot of what artifacts on GitHub do is kind of bundle some software, right? It tries to build some software, tries to build an installer, it tries to build I don't know what. So that's where things get a bit more funky with Nix, but also I think we've put a lot of effort into thinking how to make this interface really simple. So before we talked about, Travis introduced this idea of like, I don't care how you do Python. I don't care how you package Rust, right? Just do it for me. Pick the best tool. So with devenv, we kind of have two levels of how devenv works. One is like we say, languages Rust. All right, that's going to give me a compiler, linter, all kinds of things I need to do Rust. But then maybe I want to package these things with Nix, right? Maybe I want to not just devenv to provide the environment for me, but actually like package the whole thing using Nix. So there's all kinds of projects out there, Create2Nix, Narx, I don't know, there's probably like 10 of them. The idea in devenv we've picked is like, okay, we're going to pick the tool for you and kind of hide it behind this uniform API and say, config languages Rust. So this is gonna pick all the configuration you possibly have there and now apply it and import this Rust application that I have there. With a attribute set there where we don't support that yet, but at some point you can override things there, right? So you can say like, but I want you to have, I don't know, this extra system library available or whatever when I'm importing this thing. But in this case, we don't support that yet. That will come up with time. But the idea is, okay, this is now a very simple So we have, let's say I have like Rust, Python, and Go. This is quite simple to understand what's happening here. Outputs, this is similar idea to Flakes, except in devenv, we kind of have outputs as a specific attribute set, and here we can kind of expose different things that this environment exposes at the Nix level. In this case, we are exposing Rust and Python apps. All right, there is still kind of like something in between. What's missing is, if we're not going full Nix, then how do artifacts look? And this is something that would look a bit of like defining a task that will then upload something. That's something we haven't implemented yet, but it could definitely be done. So this would fall into the category of like CI-specific tasks, right? That could then similar to the GitHub Actions artifacts. All right, so this is a few examples. So we've developed something we called devenv Cloud, which is completely open source, available here, written in Rust. That kind of implements this idea of GitHub Actions, but with Nix. Yeah. So tracing is one of my favorite parts of Rust ecosystem. Those that don't know it, it's like kind of like open telemetry, but built into Rust as a first-class crate or a language thing that's like used all over the ecosystem, and it's just simply amazing. So we've done a lot of stuff with it. I'm going to show some of the things we did. So we've been working on kind of like a terminal interface for devenv, which kind of hooks back into Nix. And here you can see like it will show you like something is building, downloading, and call all kinds of progress bars. You can like go up and down, and you're going to see the logs of like a specific Nix build that's like being performed. Like at the bottom, you get like a nice summary of what's happening. Probably most of you have used num or have heard about num, which is like quite popular. We wanted to the only downside of num, it's written in Haskell, so we don't want to like bring all of that in. So we've opted out of creating our own interface and kind of like making it a little bit simpler. So this is a demo, and there is a pull request. It's not ready yet. But the main idea is like, if you invoke devenv, the terminal interface interacts at the Rust level with the devenv API. And then devenv itself will use tracing to kind of signal something has started, something has stopped. It's going to invoke Nix, which is going to do the same. We created a bridge which parses Nix logs and then exposes that interface at the tracing level. Or we also have support for SNIX, although it's not implemented yet, but the abstraction exists, and that also will use then tracing to signal back. So the idea is either devenv, Nix, or Snix, whatever they're talking the same kind of UI interface, and so we can kind of like display in the terminal what each part that's being invoked is doing. All right, how is that all relevant to to cloud, right? That's the question. I'm gonna show that here. So we use the same thing for the cloud, right? The thing that the terminal interface is displaying is the same thing that then cloud is using to parse. So here is a bit of like a diagram how it works. When you push something to devenv cloud, it's going to spawn a VM. There is like a devenv init, which is a very simple Linux init that we've created that does as close as possible to nothing as you would imagine, just setting up the basics. And then in the repo, you will see there is a devenv driver. So that's kind of like a controller or whatever you might call it that will then spawn devenv. And it knows how to do that on Linux or on macOS because it has to do different things. And then the same thing happens here. So it's going to start devenv, and that will run Nix or Snix. And all of this will use then tracing to kind of like pipe through all that's happening through a socket back to the host, and then display this in a web interface. So this is an example for Linux, but macOS is a bit more complicated, so we'll just skip that. The idea is, yeah, for each VM we spawn a job. We use tracing to report everything back to what's happening inside the VM. But the major benefit is this environment that devenv spawns there's nothing in there. Like devenv will construct the whole developer environment. So this is a major difference to GitHub Actions, where you are essentially polluting your environment, whatever Ubuntu provides, right? So that's where discrepancy comes from. So by default, you get core utils. That's it. That's all you get in a CI. So if I go back to previous slide, we can go from git push to evaluating in under a second, and this is without any kind of performance optimizations at all, which is kind of nice. When you think about GitHub Actions, you would usually install Nix, install devenv or whatever. So all of these steps are executed every time you run a CI job, and it's completely not needed if you build a CI that is like Nix first. I mean, and this is excluding the Git clone, right? So this is like if you have like a huge repo, that's obviously going to take some time. But assuming you have a very small repo. All right. Did I forget about something? Right. The web interface for tracing is very basic. It's essentially non-existent. So this is the part that we still have to wire up. But we are right now focusing on really defining the terminal interface first and making sure we ship that as a feature. And then once we are happy with that, we always try to first do the local feature first, or do it the opposite way, and then try to always think about how does that affect the cloud, and then implement the same thing in the cloud. So that's yet to be done. Because this is open source, and we want people to set it up for whatever they're using, we've integrated Zitadel. I don't know if you're familiar with Zitadel. Think of Okta or any kind of SSO solutions that exist out there, but it's completely open source, so you can self-host it. It supports all of the enterprisey features. It supports passkeys. It supports one-time passwords, everything. And devenv Cloud integrates with it. The way it works, it uses OIDC, so tokens, to kind of expose that to the app. And then behind that, you can configure whatever SSO you want. And plug it into your company, team, whatever you're using. It's a beast. It's a beast. It's a complex part, as always, authentication is. But that's what you're dealing with if you want to provide these kind of features. we didn't want to re-implement authentication, just CI. So we'll leave that out to these guys. It's actually a company from Switzerland, so it's pretty interesting. They're doing really cool stuff, I think. All right. So is it really that simple, right? Is that really yeah, like Nix solves like 80% of the problems for us, and then we just have to build a tiny bit of abstraction on top of that to replace GitHub Actions, and most importantly, to make a CI know about Nix and have it as a first-class citizen, right? I think that is the major difference, and then optimize for a lot of things that could be done in the future. Let's say if you're using GitHub Actions, you usually download a bunch of stuff, then you run some stuff, and then you upload. That is kind of unavoidable, but with a CI that is like Nix specific, what you can do, you can be smart about it, right? You can be prepared and say, okay, we're gonna make things that are frequently used less locally available, and that's all future work, but that's the benefit of having a CI that speaks Nix. So now, before I finish, I think I just want to share a bit of like the idea behind devenv. The way I see it is like, systemd did a lot of great things, I think. I know some people don't like it, but I think that the fact that we don't talk about init systems, it means that it's its job, and that is like a finished subject. So I have a similar vision for devenv. I want it to absorb a lot of the different tools and pack it into one thing. That comes with the downsides, of course. That means that some decisions had to be made that could have been made differently, but they were made very thoughtfully and for a specific reason. So we kind of like reimagined how Nix interface looks like. We reimagined how Docker Compose would look like. We have reimagined how the interface for GitHub Actions would look like. And now there's two things we want to explore in the future. Like we want to rewrite dir-env, at least the parts that we are using. Why? The major reason is when you're working on a Nix project, like you change the Nix project and then like it just starts to rebuild like it reloads your shell if you're using dir and starts to build something from scratch. And that can mean like you need to suddenly wait 10 minutes for your terminal to be ready. So what we want to do is like kind of move that to the background so that it's rebuilding in the background, and when it's done, then it just reloads your shell instead of like annoying you as soon as something has changed. We have noticed that while developing on devenv itself, that it's really annoying. And the features we're using for devenv are very specific to devenv, so there is no reason to have a separate tool, and we can do a lot more, but that's for the future. And the second is process compose. Once we have a terminal interface, right now we use process compose. It's a really nice terminal interface for launching different processes and being able to see logs and stuff like that. But the terminal interface you saw before, there's not much work to just also display processes that you're running in the same kind of fashion. That will give you like a nice feeling that you're using one tool for processes, for setting up Nix and all kinds of stuff. So that's future work, but something we plan to do quite soon. Yeah, but I think that systemd trying to rewrite the ecosystem so that it works together is pretty fits devenv well, and the more we do of that, the more we see the benefits of it. One example for process compose is like right now you cannot use tasks like you cannot say run this process, then when this process is ready, run this task, and then when this task finishes, start this other process, right? That is a quite complex feature, but like you might easily imagine, like, I don't know, run the database, run some migrations, and then do something else, for example. It does come up quite often in developer environments. So this is something that we cannot do right now because process compose is a completely separate projects and we cannot hook into it. The only thing you can do is you can run tasks before or after a process has finished, which is already pretty helpful for like setup and tear down, but not between inter-process dependencies. All right. You don't have a mic.
I have a mic.
You have a mic.
Yeah. And before Domen wraps up, Ocean Sprint's coming back. It's a where should I stand? It's a really nice week-long hacking event on Canary Islands, where Domen and I are staying most of the year. If you see people running around with these T-shirts, ask them how the event was, and then apply and see you in April 2026. Yes,
we don't have the dates yet, but
yeah. So don't buy flights yet. We don't have the exact dates, but it's probably going to happen in April.
Yeah. Which iteration is it?
It's going to be the 6th one.
The 6th iteration.
Yeah. And
yeah.
Everyone welcome to apply.
To come and hack on Nix with us. Thank you. All right. So before I finish, a bit of info. So a huge disclaimer. This is alpha quality software. We are going to start private beta soon. It's open source, so you can build it and run it yourself. It's probably not going to work for you. We still have to do a lot of work. So I don't recommend doing that, just to be very explicit. And second of all, we're going to open up private beta, as I said, in a couple of days. And then we would like to see people start using it. And probably we're going to start inviting first people only after a few weeks. But we wanted to share this with everyone and to explore the code base, to explore the ideas before it's ready. And yeah, with that disclaimer, I hope we can get Nix into more things, and let's get it into GitHub Actions and GitHub. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Do we have questions? Okay, I guess first come, please.
Thanks. Great talk. Thanks. Maybe I missed it. You might have shown it, but how will it look like? Will I have to change my GitHub build YAML file? How will it look like in the end, or is it will it completely get rid of GitHub Actions? How?
Yeah, so the idea is if you have dev.nix in your repo, we will just pick it up in the CI, and we're gonna, for all available platforms, so Linux and macOS, we're just gonna build that thing. So a bit of explicitness that GitHub Actions has, we create a bit of conventions, right? So if you have dev.nix, then we assume you're gonna run Linux and macOS. But then we're going to provide knobs to disable. Let's say you can say, okay, I don't want to run the macOS build. So you can get rid of GitHub Actions. There are parts of GitHub Actions that we don't do. So GitHub Actions you can execute for all kinds of events, right? So if an issue is open, then you can execute something. And we don't support it yet, but you can completely hook up that in the future and say you want to create developer environments when the issue is created and then run something, right? So there is features that are also missing, just to be explicit, that it's not fully feature complete yet. But the idea is, yeah, you can get rid of GitHub of YAML files for the workflows and just use Domen for that. That's the vision. That's not that we have to get there.
Next question. All right.
Yeah, if you go back to the slide with the uploading artifacts.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Let's say I want to build a binary package for a distro that I won't name.
All right, that makes it harder.
So some distros prefer dynamic linking, for example.
Right.
So Nix will patch the binary to hardcode the Nix store paths, which is why sometimes you might not want to upload or build with Nix if you need to upload binary artifacts.
Yeah.
Can you do that with Debian?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So one of the limitations of this approach is it tries to push you into the Nix land, right? As soon as you want to escape that and kind of do a 180, you hit into the typical limitations of Nix. Can you do that? There is a lot of projects that try to do that, right? There is like NixLD and all kinds. But you have the same limitations here, right? You have to find your way to either build a static library, right, or to patch the dynamic things. None of this does that for you, right? You still have to rely on these projects. The idea is that I hope that in the future you don't have to escape that, right? I mean, of course, in real life, we all know that there's legacy systems and all of that, and for those you will always have to do it. But I hope that in the future we can build an ecosystem where we slowly like abandon the Internet Explorer 6 and move forward. Yeah.
Thanks.
So the answer is no, not easily.
Yeah, thanks for a great talk. I was wondering, there are some code forges like Git and ForgeJo that have almost GitHub Actions. Is that on your scope to also support those, or is it best effort case?
Right, it's a good question. I don't know if you noticed. Now I need to find. Right. So here we kind of made cloud a separate namespace and GitHub a separate, right? So you could have config cloud CI dot, your favorite platform where the hooks are coming from. We're gonna focus on the major, probably maybe GitLab, but again GitHub. But like I want to have and say, Dev Cloud supports GitHub really well. It's a replacement for workflows before we go and explore others. But the reason why we made it open source is that everyone can contribute that feature. So if somebody comes and makes a pull request and does the work, then I don't see the reason why this can be supported. Assuming that, because actually these integrations are not that as complex as you think, right? You need to get data from the thing and kind of extract it, like map it into the Nix world and kind of like expose that metadata onto the job, and that's pretty much. And then kind of use an API to report back a status or something. That is kind of like most of the work. So we're definitely not going to do it before we are happy with the GitHub part. But yeah, feel welcome to contribute that if you want.
Next question.
I think it's here and back there.
All right. Let's go here.
All right. Can we have a quick look at the outputs slide again?
Seems to be the popular one.
I know you said it was future work or in progress. So the Rust app and Python app entries actually caught my eye because at least at work, we don't use the Rust platform build Rust package or the Python package build Python package functions, but you use the two Nix adapters.
Right.
Because you don't necessarily want to use the Nix packages, Python packages. You want to use what's in your UV lock or in your PyProject lock.
Exactly.
And perhaps I simply didn't hear it earlier, but can we somehow finagle these two Nix adapters into these import statements that we have on the bottom there?
Yeah, so actually the Python one, there is a pull request for it, and it uses UV to Nix. So the idea is like, we examine the ecosystem and we put the best tool out there that like does the best conversion. For Rust, we are using Cray to Nix. I always forget because these names are so similar, so I have to look at that. But for Python, UV to Nix. And if a better tool comes up, we can just plug it in the background and we start using a different tool, right? That's the idea. But you can also imagine that here you could have python.uv.import, so you could also implement different kinds of imports, right? Because like, let's say in JavaScript, you have different package managers, right? So now you might use pnpm or yarn or one of the 1,000 others. So we have the flexibility to also implement others. So yeah, the answer is basically, yeah, that's the idea. And we try to pick the tools that use import from derivations, so you don't have to like generate logs and do the whole bootstrapping dance, with hopes that Nix will improve its import from derivation feature in the future.
All right. I think the
Two more
time is
ahead.
up, or what does your timer say?
It says it's up.
It says it's up. Okay, maybe one quick one, but it also depends on you to answer.
All right,
quickly.
I will be quick. I can promise that.
Okay, you pick who. Who? Which one? Here?
Yeah, sorry.
No stress. A lot of my colleagues work with supporting CI and CD systems for other developers in our company. One of their asks is visibility, so they can help maintain a solid CI and CD setup. The traces that are being emitted, I'm familiar with the standard Nix traces and debugging those. You mentioned the trace functionality in Rust. Is there potential to export the traces to OTel exporters outside of this setup?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, right now, the logs we store is basically tracing, right? And then the things we show, we extract from that and filter through. So, yeah, you could then use that to leverage and plug it into something that knows about tracing. And expose that and deal with that. That's not something we have done, but it can be done. That's the idea.
All right, we're done. Sorry. The people in the back are getting mad at me. Let's thank our speaker again.
All right, thank you.